Unfortunately, when we call it highly pathogenic, it really is. If you wait 2 or 3 days, you'll have 50 to 75% mortality. I'm passionate about producing food for the people that live in this country. And the way that we're doing and managing this disease today needs to change.
Welcome to Unplucked, the official podcast of the Poultry Science Association. This is the podcast that strips away the fluff and gets real about poultry science from bench to barn. I'm your host, Andy Vance, Executive Director of the Poultry Science Association. Here we're going to go beyond the headlines, tackle tough questions, and dive into the scientific research shaping poultry production and processing. No jargon, no filter, just honest conversations with the experts. Thanks for joining us for our debut episode. Our goal with this podcast is to talk about poultry science in a way where we make the connection from the lab to the barn, from the barn to the supermarket to the restaurant, or to home sweet home in your kitchen. Each week, we'll welcome a guest who's got the technical chops to break down a big issue in a meaningful way, and you'll walk away with a better understanding of how we can all work together to advance poultry science worldwide. Let's meet this week's guest. I'm pleased to welcome in to talk about one of the biggest issues facing poultry producers and researchers, Dr. Craig Rowles, who is General Manager of Cage-Free Production at Versova Farms in Ohio. Dr. Rowles is a veterinarian by trade and training, but really wears the producer hat well because he's been involved in animal agriculture for nearly 30 years, received his DVM at Iowa State University, and worked as a mixed animal veterinarian for 14 years prior to taking a position as a manager of an 8,000 sow farrow-to-finish operation where he farmed there for 18 years. His degree gives him this strong background in bird health and animal husbandry. And then that previous experience in the swine industry, I imagine, has given him some pretty good perspective into managing animal health and biosecurity and many of the related issues. Dr. Rowles, welcome to Unplucked. Let's get right into this. You know, as we talk about H5N1, this is not certainly a new disease. This outbreak isn't even new at this point. It's one that feels like we've been dealing with for a while. From your standpoint as a producer and a veterinarian, what's your overview and your perspective on the state of affairs?
It's important to go back and understand the history of avian influenza. You know, historically, there's always been a level of low-path AI that has been in the wild bird population forever. And occasionally, a low-path would get into poultry. Oftentimes, it'd be turkey. And you would see a mutation occur within that turkey farm that would mutate it into a high path. Biosecurity in those days probably wasn't the best, and you'd, sometimes get some lateral transmission from equipment and people movements, and the federal authorities and veterinarians would recognize that there was a problem. They'd get their arms around it and stamp out and eradicate those flocks, and we'd go back around our merry ways, and we'd go back to business. But things have been changing since then. Since 1996 in China, there was a mutation that occurred in wild birds. And so for the first time, you started to see high path AI exist in the wild bird population. And that took a little while to work its way through Asia and into Northern Europe. And it finally got into the United States in 2015. And we had our first exposure to high path AI in those days. And so we had several outbreaks, and we used the same techniques of identifying, eradicating, depopulating, and stamping out the virus. There was several lesson learned conferences that occurred in the aftermath of that. And I think what we learned at that point in time is that the poultry industry really needed to do a better job of beefing up our biosecurity systems. So all across our businesses and our farms, we made huge investments to try to stop the major transmission of virus by walking the virus into your farm. All right. If you think about the transmission of the virus, it's oftentimes most commonly seen in the fecal material. The idea that a wild bird could poop on the ground and you could step on that with your boot and you could walk it right in. And so we invested in shower in, shower out facilities. We changed our processes and our procedures so that we could make sure that we honored what's called the line of separation in our buildings, which really is the exterior walls saying we're not going to let virus get walked into our farms. And I would say by and large, after 2015, we did a pretty good job because we didn't see anything up until about 2022. And in 2022, we started to see a recurrence of the virus. And now we're finding out that the virus we're seeing it be more widespread, more endemic in the wild bird population. And over the last 12 to 24 months, what we've seen is just widespread outbreak that is overwhelming our traditional biosecurity measures. And as they looked at the genotyping of the virus, it showed that contrary to what we saw in 2015, now what we're seeing in 22, 23, and 24, instead of being lateral transmission, we're now seeing more direct introductions of virus. And they can tell that by looking at the mutations and the genetic sequencing data. There's good evidence to suggest that. And so the practices that we implemented in 2015 were effective for what we were trying to defeat. But what we're seeing now is a virus that is so widespread that we're getting direct introductions into our farms. And that's the problem that we're facing today.
I was looking at the latest CDC data. They were tallying up 70 potential human cases through the end of February, 166 million birds that we've culled through the end of February, according to CDC's latest tracker, which is meant, to go to your business in the laying side of things, a flock that's down, 10% roughly. And I know you were very involved as a leader in United Egg Producers and trade organization working on dealing with this. And as you talk with your fellow producers, are we starting to piece together the learnings, as you referred to it, from this outbreak? And are you starting to see or put into play changes in your barns to address those? Or are we still in an area where we don't know what we don't know yet?
It's a little bit of both. You brought up a really good point about the human infections. A point that I didn't mention earlier was the fact that in the last year, we've seen this virus move into other mammalian species. We had always seen a number of carnivore type species, foxes, wolves that are in the wild that were consuming carcasses of animals that had shown some exposure. But in April of last year, we saw our first outbreak in dairy herds. And so a lot of human exposure came because of the intimate contact that dairy farm workers have, and with the dairy cow themselves. And it was found that there was really, really high concentrations of virus in the milk. And so if you think about dairy farm workers that are hooking on milking machine apparatus and they're touching their face, touching their eyes. And so a lot of contact exposure occurred, from that kind of work. It implies how this virus is becoming more well adapted to other mammalian species. In terms of, what are we doing different? There's still things that we don't know. All right. And the things that we don't know are there is a growing body of belief and there's a growing body of evidence that aerosol transmission, either through dust particles or just through direct aerosol, could play a role in virus transfer. And that whole topic can be somewhat controversial, at times, because some feel there's not enough direct evidence, while others will show pretty good. There's a study out of Czechoslovakia recently that showed really good transmission from one farm to another with very, very specific genetic sequencing. The point is that we're not really sure yet what more we can do from a biosecurity effort. And that's where, as an industry and talking to USDA, one of the efforts that we want to make is to understand what can we do differently to add to the body of evidence of what we should do more for biosecurity.
I'm curious, as you talk about biosecurity and given your background in swine production as well, that if I think about biosecurity and ag meetings I've attended over the years, a lot of discussion on the swine side about biosecurity. And not that we haven't in the poultry space, obviously we have. when you kind of compare your experience in one livestock species to the other, how are we doing generally in the poultry side? Or are there things we need to learn from your former colleagues in the swine space that we could apply to improve our biosecurity measures in our layer houses, for example, or broiler facilities and so on?
Yeah, I would say that the swine industry was ahead because they were forced to. In
Right.
terms, there was a number of diseases that the swine industry has dealt with, and so a lot of the shower in, shower out facilities, developing the whole plan of a line of separation and a perimeter buffer area, and looking at how you move animals on and off a farm, how you move supplies, materials, and repair parts on and off of farms. All of those kinds of processes and procedures that we have instilled into the poultry farm that I work with have come from our experience on the swine side. If you look at some of the work that's done in PRRS and how air filtration is used to prevent aerosol transmission of PRRS, I continue to look at that as an option, for us on the poultry side.
Yeah.
But knowing that we have big challenges there just because of the dust and the dander that you see on a poultry farm and how filters can plug and what's the best effective way to provide that kind of aerosol protection. That's an area that I think needs further exploration.
I think is a good segue into something I've been thinking about. So for you with your producer slash veterinarian hat on, if you're talking to a group of researchers, be they at university or in industry or U.S. Department of Agriculture, what is it that you'd like to see the research community focusing on right now to help you to answer some of those unknowns at this stage? Or where could you use some support from the research community to help you solve and fight this problem at the farm level?
Well, I think there's several areas. Number one, taking a look at what I would call or describe as a post-outbreak investigation to say, okay, what are the commonalities that we see on farms that break versus farms that don't break? What are they doing differently? That farms that are failing versus farms that are being successful? Are there steps that other producers can learn from shared learning to say, hey, if we make this adjustment in our biosecurity protocol, you're going to have an improvement? Secondly, I think there needs to be some further work in terms of just the biology of the virus and virus transmission. Specifically, how is that virus actually getting into these barns?
Mhm.
And so we need to understand the potential for aerosol, or do we need to do things to mitigate either dust or aerosol transmission?
Yeah, I think that area right there is really fascinating, especially as I was thinking about the differences in ventilation and filtration from a hog barn to a poultry facility. And obviously that's an area of discussion where poultry scientists are already doing a lot of work in terms of just ventilation and air movement in barns specifically, but layering in that factor of filtration, that's a potentially thorny issue. When you pick apart some of the other ways that we move this discussion forward and how we they stop the disease, mitigate the spread, or limit the damage. If we say, okay, the water's already over the dam, what are your thoughts on this question of vaccination and how we maybe change the game from a preventative measure and then treatment strategies and kind of this move toward what comes next?
Right, great question. Um, for a long time, we have avoided discussion of vaccination because we recognize the complications that the use of vaccine can bring.
Mm,
All right. We recognize that the egg industry is not the only poultry group in the United States. And in fact, we're dwarfed in size and scope by the broiler industry. And we have great respect for our colleagues. And we don't want to do anything that's going to put their economic interests in jeopardy.
sure.
Having said that, the damage that's being done in the egg industry right now is significant. And what we're doing currently isn't sustainable. It's not sustainable for the producer. It's not sustainable for the federal government in terms of how much money they're having to invest in depopulation. And it's not sustainable for our consumers that are paying $8 a dozen for eggs right now. So from our perspective in the egg industry, we believe it's time to add another tool to the toolbox, and that means adding vaccine. And at the heart of it, I see vaccine having three pillars. Number one, the vaccine has to be achievable. In other words, it has to be something that we can do in our routine practices, in our normal method of raising and developing pullets that producers can actually do without having heartache and heartbreak and hard work that just is overly burdensome. Number two, it has to be affordable, right? If someone says, well, you have $10 a dose, and it has to be something that we can all afford within our normal course of business and still provide products that can be used and is satisfied, because to be sustainable, it has to be affordable. And number three, it has to be acceptable. And that's going to probably be the biggest hurdle of this process, because it has to be acceptable to our trading partners. It has to be acceptable to our customers. And so that means there's going to be lots of discussions, because traditionally, countries that vaccinate are limited in their ability to export products to other countries. The United States is just the same. Countries that typically vaccinate for avian influenza, we do not import products from those countries. We put restrictions on them. And so we have to think our way through, how do we manage that? Well, there's a couple things that I think we need to all think about. First of all, a lot of those countries that vaccinate, they don't do a lot of surveillance in the aftermath. So I think coupled with a vaccination program, there needs to be a surveillance program that is active and robust and is looking for virus. And so the idea is that using vaccination, we should raise the threshold at which infection should occur.
Yeah.
All right. That's the primary purpose. And then you have a surveillance program that is put in place so that we're actively looking for wild virus. And if we find farms that do become infected that are either clinical or subclinical, you're still going to take those farms down just like we do today. The hope and expectation of using that additional tool was that the number of farms that become infected should be greatly reduced.
Right.
So I think it's important for our trading partners to understand that we still want to maintain a negative status.
Yeah.
All right. But we want to use this tool to enhance our ability to have a negative status. And it is likely that this will not necessarily start as a countrywide program. It is likely going to be started in a zoned or area or regional type program. And there's precedent for that with USDA and our trading partners even now, to say when we have an area that becomes infected, because we have a good surveillance program for infections, that we can zone or area that up. In some states, it's down to the county level. All right.
Right.
In some cases, it's state level. It depends on country to country. But I think if we start with a program that uses active surveillance, we use a zoned approach, and then build confidence with our trading partners that what we're doing is the right way, we can build and expand upon that over time.
I love the way you describe that. This is one tool in the toolbox, and how do we kind of build this system where we can maintain that status. I also appreciate your mention of the term sustainability here. It's something that has so many different dimensions. You talked about the economic sustainability for the producer certainly being important, the economic sustainability for the consumer, obviously important. When we talk about egg prices up, 53% January year over year, according to the Consumer Price Index that the federal government puts out, USDA is forecasting a more than 40% increase yet this year in their latest food price outlook. So that obviously is very concerning for families trying to feed their kids. And it's obviously concerning for you being in the egg business, trying to figure out how to meet that. What I want to get your take on as a producer is the sustainability of our current depopulation strategy. I'm starting to see, and I don't know if you are as well, Dr. Rowles, but I'm starting to see discussion in some of the online communities I inhabit, from non-ag folks, non-poultry folks, talking about depopulation, and that, that we are culling as many birds as we are in response to the pandemic. Are you hearing that kind of discussion from consumers and the general public, and how do you think that feeds into what we as scientists and producers and technical experts need to do in managing this disease outbreak?
I think there is a growing sense that people are wondering, why are we going through this depopulation effort? And it's important to understand that if you have an early diagnosis of just a few birds, that suddenly you're taking the whole farm down. Well, our experience with high path AI is that if you wait 3 or 4 days, you're going to have a natural loss of birds that is going to be not very acceptable either.
Yeah, much less.
All right. Yeah, it's unfortunately, when we call it highly pathogenic, it really is, especially this D1 that we're seeing right now. If you wait 2 or 3 days, you'll have 50 to 75% mortality pretty routinely. No one goes into the business of production thinking that, well, I hope I get to depopulate birds someday. No one does that.
It's awful.
We're in it because we care about the birds. We care about who's taking care of them. I'm passionate about producing food for the people that live in this country. This is all I've ever cared about, is producing food through animal agriculture. And the way that we're doing and managing this disease today needs to change. We're going to get change. We're going to bring change about because it's the right thing to do for our industry and for our country and for our consumers.
I appreciate that passion, Dr. Rowles, because I think all of us who got involved in animal agriculture did it because we love animals. That's certainly what got me started in the livestock industries. I grew up wanting to raise cows with my dad. Now I ended up, working in this space, but that passion for animal agriculture, I think, is something that so many of us have in common. I want to finish up as we kind of close out our time together in this inaugural episode of Unplucked. We're going to finish every conversation with questions that I find really interesting, want to learn about and get your take on. And the question I have for you, what's one misconception about poultry science or the poultry industry that you wish more people understood?
I would use the size matters response, that the farms that we operate today are much bigger than what old McDonald's farm is in the eye of the consumer, right? Their vision is a small chicken house with a few chickens running around outside, and that somehow if you're bigger, you don't care. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
Nothing could be further from the truth. And in fact, just because you're bigger, it means you have even greater responsibility to ensure that you're caring for the birds, that you are delivering a product, that you know that you're asking them to put that product in their mouth every day, and that there is a great responsibility that goes into that. And we accept that responsibility. We welcome it. Size doesn't matter. Caring does.
Oh, man, that's really powerful. That's a great place to end it right there. Dr. Craig Rowles, General Manager of Cage-Free Production of Versova Farms. Thank you for joining us on this inaugural episode of Unplucked, the official podcast of the Poultry Science Association. Friends, a couple of things I wanted to encourage you to take note of. If you head over to poultryscience.org, early bird registration is now open for our annual meeting. We'll be in Raleigh, North Carolina this July. And so registration is open. Our best rates are available until May 14th. So you can go register for the annual meeting, 4 days of poultry science and networking in a beautiful city. You can also, of course, book your hotel rooms and take advantage of all of the different social and networking activities. All that information is available at poultryscience.org. Just go to the annual meeting page. Speaking of meetings, this October, we will inaugurate the Pacific Rim Scientific Conference. PSA is going to Macau. They're one of the special administrative regions of China. October 13th through the 16th, we'll be visiting with Poultry Sciences from around the Pacific Rim region. A great scientific committee working on a program of some innovative presentations of what's happening on that side of the planet. Would encourage you to save the date for that. You can also learn more about that meeting at poultryscience.org. Coming up, next episode, we'll be talking about smart farms and fowl tech, future of poultry automation, featuring Colin Usher from Georgia Tech. Really interesting conversation and some of the things that he's working on in robotics and poultry processing. Then the following episode will be Breaking the Shell and how in ovo sexing is transforming poultry farming. We'll be talking with Yuval Cinnamon from the Volcani Center in Israel. A couple of really exciting episodes coming up. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating. It really does help. I encourage you to go to your favorite podcast platform, subscribe, and rate this episode. Tell your friends in the industry about Unplucked. Until next time, on behalf of the Poultry Science Association, I'm Andy Vance.